Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz at ClassicsToday.com. Now, I just had a root canal, and so I'm completely anesthetized, and because I'm numb and sort of under the influence of a controlled substance, this seems to me the perfect time to deal with opera, because as I've mentioned before, I'm terrified of opera and opera people. Particularly, the fighting, the squabbling, the hysteria about whether, who's better, whether it's Maria or Joan or Kiri. It's enough to make you crazy, And so I thought, now that I'm drugged, I can probably handle it with a little bit more equanimity. And better still, I have a couple of cards up my sleeve here because the operas I'm dealing with are Benjamin Britten's. Yay. In other words, first of all, it's opera in English, and opera people don't generally get into a fuss over that. And there are no major female roles, or only a couple, and no love interest at all. So all of the hysteria and craziness that attends with the divas who sing them and the divas who listen to them, I don't have to deal with. I'm only talking about Benjamin Britten. This is a box of all of his Decca recordings of his operas, mostly conducted by himself. And I just want to talk about them one at a time, and we'll just see how he did as an opera composer. Now, that's the other advantage. See, I don't have to talk about one performance versus another performance because these are all terrific performances. They were either made by him or under his supervision or by people who are familiar with him. I mean, there's no question that they're all great performances and that you should have them for that reason alone. I don't have to do any comparisons. I just need to talk about the works, not so much the singers. Perfect thing to do after a root canal when you're on drugs. Let's talk about the first. Paul Bunyan. You may recall this was actually recorded for Virgin. I guess they licensed it for inclusion in this collection. It was a very good performance led by Philip Brunel. This was Britten's first opera. It was written in America. It's completely ignored. It has lots of good music. It's young Britten. It's fresh. It's lively. It's tuneful. It's attractive. It's just sort of hopeless on stage because Paul Bunyan never appears. He can't. He's like 90 feet tall and he has a big blue ox. But, he has, and instead, he's a voice. He's a big, loud, offstage voice. So the whole thing is very strange in terms of the way it sets up, but it's typical Britten in a sense because there's a kind of lack of conventional passion in his work. There's a lot of drama, there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of emotion, no question about that, but we're talking about love, sex, that kind of passion, the kind of stuff you find in like normal operas by Italian people. You don't find those in Britten. And as we'll see as the story here develops, that seems to be a trend that runs through his operas. Next, Peter Grimes, a masterpiece. What is there to say? I mean, I first encountered Peter Grimes when I was in high school because it was done at Yale University in a production that was led by Phyllis Curtin, the amazing American soprano who passed away just a couple of years ago. She was a terrific singer and a lovely, lovely person because I went to high school with her daughter. And so she used to show up all the time at Glee Club rehearsals to give master classes. I mean, she was the kindest, most giving person you'll ever want to know, and a tremendously astute and moving singer. Ned Rorem wrote a lot of his song cycles and songs for her. And she was a pioneer in the performance of American art music particularly. And the funny thing is that when I went to university, when I was at Johns Hopkins, the head of the history department was her first husband, Philip Curtin. So I got it all on all sides. In any case, they did Peter Grimes, and that's when I encountered it, and it just blew me away. It is such a great work. But again, it doesn't have any sort of conventional love interest. I mean, the great opening duet between Peter and Ellen Orford ends with, "Here is a friend." You couldn't say that the relationship between Peter and Ellen is one of high passion and sexual tension, would you? The most sexual tension in Peter Grimes is between the two hookers who work for Auntie in the pub, right? So that's the opera. But it really is a magnificent piece, and this is a great, great performance of it. And it's the standard by which all others are measured, both in terms of conducting and casting. Now, after Peter Grimes, Britten trimmed down the size of his operas because he knew that staging major works in major opera houses was going to be difficult. So he created the English Opera Group and wrote chamber operas, which are wonderful, just from an orchestral and coloristic and imaginative use of the small ensemble, 13, 14 players, something like that. They're extraordinary works. They really are. And the next one was The Rape of Lucretia. Yes, The Rape of Lucretia. This opera is so beautiful. The music is so wonderful, but the way that the story is told is so weird. I have a hard time coming to grips with it personally because the story is the story. Tarquinius rapes Lucretia, she kills herself. That's the story. The way that it's told is that there are these two sort of chorus-like narrators who frame the whole thing as this sort of Christian allegory. I mean, they keep talking about like Jesus. And what on earth Jesus has to do with the Rape of Lucretia, I have no idea. I've never been able to come to grips with it. Even when I first saw, the libretto and heard the opera, I just said, this doesn't make any sense. What are they doing this for? But at the same time, the music was so wonderful. My goodness, it's gorgeous. And you've got Janet Baker as the rapee, Lucretia. And she's marvelous, of course. So this is the reference recording of the work. And if you have less of an issue about the text than I do, you're in business, or if you just want to hear great music, I mean, it's prime Britten, just listen to it on that basis. Then we get Albert Herring. Now, comic operas are always a problem by people who are not particularly funny. Britten could be witty, he really could be, but funny? Like comic funny? I don't know. He did have excellent dramatic timing, which helps. The problem I have with Albert Herring, again, full of absolutely sensational music, is that he's got sort of older opera singers playing like young adolescent children. And that just doesn't work. It's not funny. It doesn't work. I mean, they're not supposed to be older. They're really supposed to be younger kids. In his later operas, Britten had the very smart idea of having children play themselves, which they do extremely well, by the way. But again, lots of great music, and whether or not you go for the story and the plot and the way it's told, it's a matter of personal taste. You can't fault the craftsmanship at any point. And after the Albert Herring, we get another masterpiece, Billy Budd. Remember the John Dexter production at the Metropolitan Opera House with the giant boat, that unfolds during the battle scene, and they're all standing around going, "This is our moment, the moment we've been waiting for these long weeks." Fantastic. There is a casting issue with Billy Budd, which really is one of Britten's very greatest works, and that's getting the best claggard. You need a dark baritone, bass, a real bass, a really black sound. And it's a hard role to play because there's a great deal of homoerotic tension. There's a subtext there between Claggart and Billy, who he keeps calling handsome and beauty, and it's quite creepy. But if it's not to sound silly, you need somebody who can really make something perverted and licentious out of it. You know what I mean? And actually, Billy Budd kind of brings up a story that, or a trend in Britten's operas that we first saw a little bit in Paul Bunyan, which is either the absence of a conventional love interest, or if there is one, it's perverted. It's sex is bad. Britten apologists like to say, well, he always treated the idea of innocence corrupted. Well, to me, that's not quite right, because Britten was a prude. He really was a prude. And the idea here isn't that the innocence is being corrupted. It's that sex is evil. It's that simple. I mean, what is not innocent about love? The implication there is that somehow love is evil. And love isn't evil, or that love with sex, physical love, is evil. And I believe all of that's total nonsense. That's part of that, sort of Puritan ethos that, civilization has been so inept in trying to deal with or get rid of. And I find that Britten's whole take on it is kind of pathological and strange, almost like Puccini's Little Girls, who he has to murder and kill. There's a real sexual dysfunction in these operas, but he makes great drama out of them. And Claggart is one of those characters who can, if it's done correctly. This, again, is a stunning performance. It has been equaled subsequently, I think, but what are you going to say? It's absolutely great. It's the revised version of the opera, of course. The original version with extra acts has been recorded. I think it shows, as usual, that Britten's revisions were intelligent and correct. After Billy Budd, we get Gloriana, the big failure, the bomb. Oh, this was such a juicy one. This was written for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, and it completely flopped. And the English musical establishment was so gleeful in their trying to take Britain down a peg. It's something they just love doing to their own people, And the fact that Gloriana was such a miserable failure absolutely signals to me it was a masterpiece, that it was fabulous. They couldn't have gotten it more wrong. It has some of the best opposition between the public and private. It's absolutely sensational. Again, love interest between Elizabeth and Essex. Does it work? Not really. We don't care. It's about community. It's about this larger-than-life character who I think Britten develops magnificently. At the very end, the character of Elizabeth gives a monologue which contains one of the few actual texts that she wrote that we have by the actual Queen Elizabeth I. It's very moving. And some people have complained about Britten when they say that, at these moments of huge emotional crisis, he deserts and abandons music entirely. Like after the mad scene in Peter Grimes, Balstrode walks up and says, "Come on, Peter, I'll help you with the boat. Sail till you lose sight of land, then sink the boat." Then Ellen goes, "No!" He goes, "Sink the boat." "Goodbye, Peter." There's no music there. It's just dialogue. But it's the only dialogue in the opera, and it stands out because I think in Britten's mind there are moments when the crushing emotional weight becomes so unbearable, and the expression is just so numbing that music has to be abandoned. There's no possibility of enriching what is being said with music. It's complete desolation in a sense, and so it is in Gloriana. It's a fabulous piece, and this recording was the one recorded by Charles Mackerras. Britten never did it because it bombed, and Decca wouldn't do it, and it's such a mistake because it's a great piece. There's a suite. It has the tournament and jousting and English courtly dances and stuff like that, but you got to hear the whole piece. It's absolutely first rate. So that's Gloriana, and then comes what many regard to be Britten's greatest masterpiece in any medium, The Turn of the Screw. Oh, is this a great opera? Oh, it's such a great opera. I've seen it like a billion times. It's unfailingly fabulous on stage. It has 5 great characters. I mean, you've got the governess, again, somewhat unconventional role, but it's Britten's best ever role for the female voice, probably, and Miss Jessel, the dead, suicidal previous governess, and Peter Quint. Peter Pears at his very best, with some of the best writing for his voice that Britten ever gave him. And then you have the 2 little bratty kids who are going to get possessed by the ghost, and you don't care what happens to them because they're 2 little bratty kids. And when Miles dies, it's hard to be. You were kind of hoping that some way they would find some way to get rid of the little jerk, don't you think? But and Mrs. Groves, Grove, the housekeeper. So you've got excellent women's roles, excellent men's roles. The casting is so balanced, but the work itself, the music, is incredible. It's a theme in variations, with each scene interspersed with a musical interlude that's a variation on the original theme. Now, the theme uses all 12 notes of the chromatic scale. Not that we care or it matters, because it's arranged quite tonally. The theme goes bum bum ba da dum bum 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 ba 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 ba, sort of, But it's absolutely phenomenal. It's an incredibly great piece, and this performance is the original cast recording. It's in mono, but extremely good mono. You'd never notice or worry about it, and it's the standard by which all others must be measured continually. It really is. It hasn't aged a whit. Next we get, oh yes, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Okay, this one's a problem. This is really a problem. And here's the problem. English composers, when they do things with Shakespeare, usually have the same problems that German composers have when they write symphonies after Beethoven. In other words, they choke. I wouldn't say that Britten choked in this quite the same sense that German composers choked, all their inhibitions boiled to the surface. No, this isn't an inhibition problem. This is, we have to do justice to Shakespeare. No, you don't. Opera is a different medium. It does not have to do justice to Shakespeare. Not in any way, shape, or form. It's stupid to do justice to Shakespeare. All those great Shakespearean operas by Verdi or, French composers, Ambrose Thomas's Hamlet, omelette as we call it in French. It doesn't make any difference what Shakespeare did or said. All you do is you take the basic storyline and you can add characters or take them away or change the plot, or you do whatever you need to do to make a terrific opera. It's a new work. Unfortunately, A Midsummer Night's Dream wants to be Shakespearean and an opera, and that's a mistake. Now, they did pick one of the better plots for that because it's a very musical story, as you know, from all the incidental music that we got composed throughout the 19th century. And you do have these three levels of characters. You have Bottom and the peasants doing the play, and then you have the royals, and then you have the fairies, led by Oberon and Titania. And here there's another problem, because for Oberon, Britten decided to use a countertenor. Why? Because the countertenor voice is creepy and asexual. At least it was in Britten's day before countertenors learned how to sing Baroque opera seria correctly. And he had Alfred Deller, possibly the most awful voice in the history of humanity. I don't know. It's just bad, So you have to deal with Oberon on Britten's recording. Otherwise, musically, it's magnificent. But as I said, it's a talky, chatty opera. It tries to have too much Shakespeare in it. And as a result, despite the wonderful musical characterization of the three strata of characters, I don't think the piece works terribly well. I enjoy listening to it not as an opera, sort of as an abstract choral vocal work. And I ignore the words as much as I possibly can. And I love Shakespeare. We all love Shakespeare, don't we? But making a Shakespeare opera is not about being faithful to Shakespeare. It's about being faithful to opera. And that's really the point, isn't it? Anyway, after that, we have two operas which I think are both failures in their special ways. The first is Owen Wingrave. I detest Owen Wingrave. This is just a dismal opera. Britten wrote it for television. I can't imagine what it looked like on television. I haven't seen it. It's probably on YouTube now. I'll bet you can watch it. I don't know. I wouldn't want to. The story, it's another ghost story. You'd think that Britten was really good at ghost stories, but this has not a single sympathetic character in it. Owen, well, okay, yeah. He's in military school and he wants to be, he's a peacenik, and he wants there to be love and warmth and kindness and human, the end to human suffering. In other words, he wants to be Miss America, is what Owen wants, right? And then he has this bitchy girlfriend, Kate, who's prodding him to go sleep in the haunted room, And then he's got his uncle, the military guy with the handlebar mustaches, who's completely stiff and rigid and jingoistic and horrible. And so Owen goes into the room and he dies. That's the story. And we have no idea why. And Kate pretends to be sorry about it. I don't know. The whole thing is so pointless to me. I mean, it's an expression of Britten's pacifist beliefs, which is lovely. But I got news for you. Pacifism is not the subject of an opera. It doesn't afford much opportunity for drama. It doesn't have a lot of emotional depth. There's no real conflict or struggle in it. it's just go sleep in the damn room and die. That's the story. And the music is quite harsh in places and militaristic appropriately and quasi-atonal in spots, but that doesn't bother me. I love atonality. I don't mind dissonance. Well, the question is, what's it for? What does it do? Does it further the characters and development in the story, or is it just there? So Owen Wingrave for me is just the bow wow among all Britten's operas. Finally, we get Death in Venice. Now, Death in Venice is sort of the apotheosis of the sex is bad theory of Britten's sexual identity. And it really is, it's such a disturbing opera. I dislike it also. I really do, just because I think the story is horrible. I mean, it's a very faithful, sort of version of Thomas Mann's novella. The character of Aschenbach, the writer, is very, very well made. There's a lot of beautiful music in it. Stuart Bedford made a gorgeous orchestral suite out of the piece that I really enjoy listening to. It should be performed more often. It really should. But the actual story with this old man running after this little boy is so distasteful. It really is. It just is. And of course, Britten kills him off because he's doing that naughty thing or has naughty thoughts. I mean, he never does anything. He just thinks about, the Apollonian versus the Dionysian aspects of love. I get where they're going with this, and in some ways, this opera, it receives a lot of praise because it's a very brave expression at the time in the 70s of Britten's and Peers' identity as gay men living in Britain, and that itself is sort of a noble thing. But that doesn't make an opera. That doesn't make for exciting, stage-worthy drama. I mean, the characters are well drawn. The whole thing is very clever in terms of its staging. It does have one absolutely awful scene called The Games of Apollo, where Aschenbach has this sort of hallucination of his little boy love, Tadzio, playing with his playmates, and you have the voice of Apollo, which is another one of those horrible countertenors. In this case, it's James Bowman, who's marginally less vile than Alfred Deller. And the whole thing is creepy in the extreme. And I don't think that was Britten's intention. I don't think his intention was that it should be like revolting and off-putting, but that's what happens, at least when I watch it and listen to it. And I really find that the opera itself, Aschenbach himself is such an unsympathetic character. The idea of preventing what is at base a very smarmy, pederastic, sort of disgusting thing as a refined Dionysian aesthetic experience in the same way that, the ancient Greeks kind of did it, that bothers me. I just don't buy it. I don't accept it. I think the whole thing is about a pederastic old man chasing after this young boy, and I'm not moved by this abstract idea of love that overwhelms him, because I'm not moved by Britten's view of sex and physicality in love, which is, of course, that it's bad and it's evil and it's wrong. Now, of course, in this case, it is bad and evil and wrong. I'm not arguing about that. It's very wrong. It's very disturbing. So Aschenbach has to die, right? But that makes him a completely unsympathetic character. What is there in this opera that moves us? That's really the question. What is it about Death in Venice that touches your heart, that makes you feel something? I don't know. I don't hear it. I don't find it. Obviously, it was very moving to Britten and to Peter Peers, whose portrayal of Aschenbach in this opera is probably one of his great ones. It's a very well-rounded and complete portrait. You can tell that they're all giving 100% in the performance. But the work itself, I don't know, it reminds me of Bernstein's A Quiet Place, too. A lot of great intentions, but again, great intentions don't make great operas. And you can say what you want. A Quiet Place is a bomb, and so is Death in Venice. But let's not dwell on that, because the fact of the matter is that Britten gave us maybe half a dozen magnificent operas. I mean, Peter Grimes, Billy Budd, The Turn of the Screw. I would add to that at least Gloriana, and either The Rape of Lucretia and Albert Herring or both. They are such wonderful, wonderful works. The music is fantastic. You may quibble with the librettos or with the, the action or the plots, but let's face it, that is something that history will decide. The truth is that Britten created opera in English at a time when no one cared about opera in English, and he made these pieces international repertory staples. And for an opera to become a repertory staple is an impossible thing to exaggerate. Just remember, Handel wrote 40 some odd operas and they disappeared for 200 years completely and utterly. So, the fact that Britten's operas are being performed and staged, and rewardingly so, is an achievement that is absolutely epic. It really is. And one that really hasn't been shared by very many 20th century composers, many of whom write operas. So I think that if you're looking for a box of Britten's operas, and you may very well disagree with my evaluation of them, here is an inexpensive way to pick them all up and draw your own conclusions. See what you think. Tell me I'm wrong. I'm not, but you can tell me. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you very much. Take care.